What does Mark Hyman say about sugar, and do you agree with it?
Well, among the things that he and many others say is that we eat way too much added sugar, and I absolutely agree with it. What I disagree with, and it's not really with just one person, but there's sort of a whole narrative on this topic, is the idea that we started blaming saturated fat for all of our ill health, and we were wrong because the real culprit is sugar, and sugar is the one and only culprit, and that's only recently been discovered. And we never warned people about sugar before, and we should have warned people about sugar. And I think all of that's wrong. First, the idea that there needs to be just one thing wrong with the diet is silly. Almost everything is wrong with the typical American diet. It's way too high in saturated fat. It's way too high in sodium. It's way too high in added sugar. It's way too high in all the wrong foods. It's way too low in all the good foods. It's way too high in ultra-processed foods and way too low in whole foods. And the list goes on and on and on. We don't need one scapegoat. And what history teaches us is if we fixate on just one scapegoat about our dietary practices, what we wind up with is a new variety of junk food that is free of that particular scapegoat. You want low sugar junk food? Yeah, we can do that. You want low carb junk food? No problem. Low fat junk food? Easy. Gluten-free junk food? Happy to accommodate, and on it goes. So the idea that there's just one thing to focus on is wrong. Our diets can be excessive in both saturated fat and sugar, and they are. And the other thing that's wrong about the current narrative is that there's some new crop of heroes who are pointing out what mainstream nutrition experts had long neglected. And the simple fact is that sugar was never neglected. We've only had dietary guidelines for Americans since 1980, so 40 years. And the initial dietary guidelines in 1980 were published with 7 bullets as the key takeaway messages. These are the most important things. If, you're going to lose some of the details in the full report, but these 7 things. Number 5 was reduce your intake of sugar. So it's really like every other flavor of dietary advice we've gotten. The advice was sound, we just didn't follow it. And we have to stop conflating what happens with people who get reasonable advice but ignore it with what happens to people who get reasonable advice and actually do reasonable things with it. Those two are conflated to propagate pseudo-confusion, to justify the sale of fad diets and gimmicks. They're not the same thing. We never did sensible things about dietary fat. We never did sensible things about dietary carbohydrate. We never did sensible things about added sugar to our diet. The opportunity to do sensible things about everything we eat is still before us. And it's not too late, but it sure as heck isn't too early, so it'd be nice if we did that. But one of the critical pathways to doing something sensible about how we eat so that we can derive more pleasure from food and more pleasure from health is to stop looking for a scapegoat or a silver bullet. It is no more all about just sugar now than it ever was all and only about saturated fat before.
Tell us the reasoning of the authors who recommend the paleo diet. Do you agree or disagree with this point of view?
Well, I think the real experts about the paleo diet, people I know best, people who really could be considered the founding fathers, it just so happens that this group is men, but who wrote the original papers, which go back to 1985 in the New England Journal of Medicine. That's when we first really started hearing scholarly dialogue on the topic of the Paleolithic diet. They're among the first to acknowledge we can't have a Paleolithic diet. Dorothy, we're not in the Stone Age anymore. Everything that our Stone Age ancestors ate, plant and animal alike, is extinct. So they had wild plants, we have domesticated plants, the animals are all gone. We can't eat like that. We can learn from it. So the argument that we can learn from it and maybe should, I think, is perfectly valid. If you think about every species other than our own, and maybe the easiest way to do this is think about visiting a zoological park. I think you can be confident that the animals are not being fed on the basis of randomized controlled trials. I don't imagine they try the lions on, hay and grass just to see how they do. I think they probably just feed the lions meat because lions in the wild eat meat. And I don't imagine they try the koala bears on hunks of wildebeest to see how they do. I think they get eucalyptus leaves. Every time, it's all about native adaptations. It's about what kind of animal is this? What is its native dietary pattern in native context? Now, maybe that can be adjusted, maybe it can be refined, maybe there are ways to alter the feeding of koalas and lions that make the diet better for them. But the place you begin is, what kind of animal is this? What are its native adaptations? What is its native diet? I think it's sort of a form of Homo sapien arrogance to think that we are the sole exception to that in the natural world. We are a kind of animal. That's what we are. And what we know about the Stone Age is far from perfect, but it tells us something about the kind of animal we are. The kind of animal we were for a much longer time than we've been modern, the kind of animal we were for a much longer time than we've had agriculture, the kind of animal we were during the period of our own native adaptations to a native food supply. And so what it tells us is we're adapted to a diet of real food, whole food, not processed food, very low intake of added sugar, very high intake of fiber, a wide variety of plants. And if we are going to eat animal food, it's not dairy. It would be meat, but it's the meat of wild animals that we catch. And there's debate about whether that was a very small part of the diet or a larger part of the diet. But all the information we have says, okay, so we are omnivores. We can thrive on a wide variety of foods. All of the foods are wholesome, simple, direct from nature in native context. And it may very well be that there's agreement now that, at least by volume, our diets were always plant predominant. So we were gatherer hunters rather than the other way around, mostly foraging. But even if there's debate about that, it's quite clear that our native dietary adaptations put us in the driver's seat. We have choices. Human beings can eat a wide variety of foods and do well as long as they are real foods, wholesome foods, foods that haven't been mucked around with by the food industry. And looking at those choices today, you'd say, okay, back in the Stone Age, we were scattered, isolated bands of roaming hunter-gatherers in a great big empty world of seemingly inexhaustible resources. We could eat whatever we want. In a modern world where there are 8 billion hungry Homo sapiens to feed every day, meat is off the menu, mostly off the menu, if not completely off the menu, because of the impact at scale, because of the costs to the environment, because of the cost to the animals. These are not wild animals that die in a hunt. These are animals that are bred to be caged their entire lives and then slaughtered in cruel and inhumane and abusive ways. That's a totally different scenario. So all of the implications of being part of a hungry global horde completely change the Paleolithic equation. I did a calculation for a column I wrote some years ago for the Huffington Post, saying, okay, there must be a way to get a clear answer to how much space do you need to make a living as a forager or hunter-gatherer. And there is. There are a lot of estimates in the anthropology literature. So I took the average of all the estimates I could find, and I applied it to a population of 7.8 billion Homo sapiens, which was the figure at the time. It's gone up since. And my calculation was 15 times the surface area of the entire Earth, including the oceans and the polar caps and the Sahara Desert. Every square inch of the Earth, we'd need 15 times more for a population of 8 billion people to be hunter-gatherers. So it's impossible. Could some individual practice a diet that way, maybe hunt, maybe eat the flesh of wild animals that they hunt, eat a wide variety of plants, to the extent possible wild plants, and might they thrive? Yeah, we have no evidence to say they wouldn't. Is a diet that includes some game and a wide variety of plants better or worse than a diet that is plant exclusive for long-term human health? We don't have the studies to answer that question. But we know that the best way for us to avoid cruelty to animals and degradation of the environment is for the population at scale to shift to plant-predominant dietary practices, not to become hunter-gatherers. So I think we can learn some things from studies of the Paleolithic diet. I think some of what we learned is very important. But the true experts on the Paleolithic diet are among those who are first to say, we can't eat that way anymore.
Can you sum up everything we've talked about today in 15 seconds?
I doubt it. But I very much agree with Michael Pollan. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. The basic theme of eating for optimal human health is very clear. It hides in plain sight, and it's massively and beautifully confluent with the things we need to do to protect the health of the overall planet and the environment as well. That theme is common ground for all of us if we let it be so. If we acknowledge that we agree more than we disagree, and then whatever disagreements we have about the details, we agree to have those discussions on the common ground, because then we could advance the proposition that our entire kind should be eating diets that are whole foods and plant predominant, and the variations on the theme would allow for ongoing science, debate, and if we are so inclined, disagreement. But we would disagree as colleagues. We would disagree as allies, advancing the mission of leveraging the power of diet and lifestyle as medicine to add years to countless lives, add life to countless years, and help save and preserve this beautiful planet we share.
What's the one thing I should do today?
Eat a plant. Go for a walk. That's two. I don't know which is more important, but eat a whole plant and go for a walk. Maybe eat the plant while walking.
What is it about the Real Truth About Health conference that made you want to come here and speak?
Well, partly this, the opportunity for the message to reverberate beyond the conference. You always worry. You go to a conference, it's a bit like a pep rally. Everybody's very excited, and then life kicks back in. Everybody gets diverted. So the opportunity for there to be legs, that what we would discuss would be memorialized in some way, and we could reference it and leverage it for a longitudinal effect. The other thing is my impression is that the folks tuning in here are eager for change, and there are a lot of activists in the mix. And I really mostly want to speak to audiences of people who are ready, willing, and able to make a difference. Gertrude Stein famously said, "A difference to be a difference must make a difference." I'm in the business of trying to make a difference, a positive difference, and I need help. So I'm looking for audiences where we can become allies and make a difference together. The one concern I have is, and this is always true, is that you preach to your choir. You know, it's basically everybody who already believes what you're going to say gathers to hear you say it, and then what they're really looking for is reaffirmation. This is what I believed, and I want to tune into people who are going to tell me that I'm right. And we all have to be very careful about that. We are least likely to learn when hearing people express only the opinions that we already own. We're most likely to learn when we listen carefully to dissent. That doesn't mean it's right. We may reject it, but we ought to listen attentively. We ought to be open to it. And if it's persuasive, we ought to be prepared to adjust our own point of view somewhat. If that's the case here, then I think there's a great opportunity for audience and speaker to be more powerful together than either of us is alone.
For those people that want to learn more about your work, where should they go?
I have my own website that is a hub to all the things that I do, davidkatzmd.com. The Katz family greatest hits in terms of recipes and food, my wife is French, brilliant cook, are all available freely to everybody on her recipe site, Cuisinicity.com. So it's like Cuisine City, but with an I in the middle, Cuisinicity.com. I am the founder and president of a nonprofit organization called the True Health Initiative. We have a global coalition of about 500 leading experts in public health, lifestyle medicine, preventive medicine, other aspects of medicine, epidemiology, culinary arts, sustainability, from 45 countries. And they actually range from paleo to vegan and everything in between, coming together to say, actually, we agree so much more than we disagree. to acknowledge that common ground and the common cause. And so I would really love for people to check out the True Health Initiative, and that's at truehealthinitiative.org. I founded a startup company called Diet ID. You can learn more about that at dietid.com. We have invented the first major advance in dietary assessment and tracking in decades. So in order to know all the details of what you eat now, your dietary pattern, your diet quality, and your nutrient intake levels, you could record everything you eat for 7 days and submit that to a dietitian. You could fill out a food frequency questionnaire for 60 to 90 minutes. We can provide all of that information and more in under 60 seconds in a fun interaction. And we're using the same technology and the same innovation to personalize diet in a whole new way, because we can help you identify where you are now, where you'd like to be, and you need 2 points to draw a line. So we generate those 2 points in a matter of mere seconds, and we can draw that line and it's unique to you. And then we can populate the line from where you are to where you want to go with a personalized sequence of incremental adjustments to your diet, kind of like a turn list on GPS. GPS doesn't tell you where to go, it just helps you get where you want to go. So we've invented the same for diet. The dietary destinations, the good diets, are all more alike than different, but they're variations on the theme. And I think it's really important to empower people to adopt the version of an optimal diet that's going to work for them and work for their family. So I'm really proud of this. I think it's a really important advance, and I encourage people to check it out at dietid.com.